make sure you guys are okay with it. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Terrific.
Good. We didn't get that.
Oh, well, it's recording though. So,
yeah,
but since it's all being recorded, cool. That's interesting because Zoom makes you approve. They've changed Google Meet.
Makes you approve.
Okay, so tech is not my strong point, but mental health is, and so that's a good thing. That's why I'm here. So we entitled this Downsizing with Compassion because this is such an emotionally fraught process for people, both for the person who wants to downsize and for their families. This is just a brief overview of information. You could talk for hours upon hours about any one of these topics. You can read volumes, and there have been much written about it. But we wanted to give people sort of that 45-minute, this is all I have time for kind of overview to start with. And so we're going to cover 3 sections today. Number 1, knowing when the right time is, how to figure that out. Again, very cursory overview. 2, what are your options? Because I think people often get fixated on like, well, I don't want to go to a nursing home, but there's actually a lot of options. And 3rd, how to start the discussion if you're on board, but your spouse is not, because we see that happen a lot. Or if you are concerned about an aging parent or other relative and you want to start the discussion with them. So it's a kind of looking at it from both of those angles. So I guess I should dive in with the right time, unless if you guys wanted to say anything, Curry and Sophie.
No, I mean, as I stated before, I know we weren't recording the time, but yeah, we're both real estate broker. Carrie is my business partner, Valley Realty, with boutique brokerage in Green Spring Valley, Owings Mills, and you know, we fully understand that this is a very, very sensitive topic. So we do always approach it, even from a business perspective, with a very high level of sensitivity. It can be very emotional. So we do always keep that in mind when we are working with our clients.
Great. Yeah, okay, so the right time, we're trying to figure this out because this is the most pivotal part of this whole process. All of the details can be worked out once you figure out if it's the right time. So there's 2 basic principles of how I conceptualize this. And the first is mindfulness. And the second is clarifying values and preferences. And they go together. Mindfulness is, oh, and I should have backed up a little bit. I'm sorry. I'm going to talk about the right time section from the emotional standpoint. And Curry and Sophie will get on and talk about like from a more of a nuts and bolts logistical standpoint. I should have clarified that. And then the options they will cover, obviously. And then the last part, how to have these conversations, I'll cover. So thinking about the right times strictly from sort of more of the emotional aspect, I think in terms of mindfulness and clarifying values and preferences. And so mindfulness gets so overused, that word, in our society. I think a lot of people are even sick of hearing the term. I don't want to be more mindful. I'm tired of it. But it really is useful. And so the definition I use comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is pretty much the person who brought this to the Western world from the Eastern world, is moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. So thinking of mindfulness as moment-to-moment, non-judgmental awareness. And it's really useful because we tend to either work on autopilot or go from a very reactivity versus just responding, and especially to emotionally charged situations. And so we're using the mindfulness to really get a sense of how does our living situation feel to us? And is it really reflective of our values and preferences at this stage of life? So backing up a little bit, how do we develop mindfulness? Because again, you could read 1,000 blog posts on it, but I'll tell you that the process is actually pretty simple. It's a muscle, so it takes a lot of work. It's not a simple thing to do, to develop, but actually developing it, you know, is really just paying attention, tuning in versus our habitual autopilot or distractions. So one way that you do hear a lot about of developing mindfulness is through meditation, and more specifically, a breathing meditation, where you just sit upright. And if we had more time, I would lead people through this, but you would just sit upright, have your eyes closed gently. You want to be upright, else you will fall asleep. And just notice your breathing. And then noticing whatever thoughts or feelings come up without getting caught up in them. So this is not daydreaming. This is not getting caught up in the narrative. This is not problem solving. It's just noticing, the same way a scientist might observe an experiment. The same way if an alien landed here, they might observe what's going on. Just absolute curiosity. And just observing what thoughts and feelings come up, letting them come and go at their own speed, and just taking notice. A lot of people don't like to meditate, and so the good news is there's lots of other options. Pretty much any activity can be used to develop mindfulness. So washing the dishes is my favorite because we can all do that on total autopilot. But if you actually stop, and a mindful way of washing dishes is to listen to how the water sounds coming out of the faucet. Listen to how it sounds when it hits the plate versus just hits the bottom of the sink. Take notice of how the water feels on your hands, the temperature, how the dish feels wet in your hands. Taking notice of how the soap smells. And not judging these things or trying to like, oh, wow, this soap smells really bad. I should get a different soap. Why am I not using Dawn or whatever? Like, we're just observing it. We can do this in the shower. We can do this if we just want to sit outside for 5 minutes and just observe what's around us. Even if you live in a more urban area, that's great too. You don't have to be in the middle of the nature to do this. Vacuuming, really anything. You're tuning in and just observing. Now, this is a muscle, right? We're not going to do it all the time. It takes a while to build up, but we want to start tuning in and using that mindfulness to see how taking care of our home feels to us. So if you're still living in, a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2,000 square foot home, how does it feel when you're cleaning it every week? How does it, and really, a lot of people would say, I don't particularly love cleaning my house, right? But really tune in, like, what is it about it, right? So am I noticing that the days that I clean, I'm kind of wiped out and can't do a whole lot more? Am I noticing that I really don't like dealing with like contractors and stuff? Like, maybe that's something your spouse did and now you're divorced or they're deceased and now you have to do it. How does that feel? Is it uncomfortable? Taking care of the lawn, maybe you tune in and you love doing that and it feels really good. Also noticing, does the environment make sense for where you are now in life? Many people, right, they buy their home when their family is young and then the whole neighborhood switches over. People move out and they're still there. How connected do you feel to your neighbors? There's no right or wrong here. I'm not saying, oh, well, you're not connected, right? I'm just saying, like, how does it feel the same way? And then taking notice, moving into values and preferences. Does your current living situation reflect your values? And values are really big things. I like to say values are one word, rules are usually a sentence. So you might value family. A rule would be you have to live near your family, right? You can value family and not live near them. You can value them in other ways. So does your home reflect your values? A lot of people are talking about the environment now. Well, does living in a really large home as one person reflect, being environmentally, how you want to be environmentally? And your preferences. We do things that make sense at different phases of our life. And so I recently was talking to someone who was always a big city person, but she felt compelled to move out to the suburbs to raise her family, and now they're all gone. And she moved back to the city and loves it, right? And so are you someone that loves the great outdoors, and is where you're living easy to access that? Or is it easy to access arts and theater if that's what you're into? If how you want to be with your family, is really involved on a very regular basis, are you living close enough to them to do that? So does this really make sense? If you love to travel, Is your house either getting in the way financially, like you can't afford to travel because the home maintenance is so much, or the spontaneity, right? If you have to then hire someone to mow the lawn and take in the mail and, all the things. And so really just reflecting on, does this make sense for me at this point in life? And how does it actually truly feel to be in this space still at this point in my life? And I should say, we're going to have time for questions at the end. And I'm going to toss it back to Curry and Sophie, and you can talk more about nuts and bolts of having to know when is the right time.
Yeah, so I think when considering downsizing, when speaking to somebody about downsizing you care about, again, always approach it with sensitivity. However, there are some factual benefits to doing so, and some people really understand things better when facts are presented, right? So currently, and it's always relevant to the current financial state of the economy, society, et cetera, paired with obviously your own personal circumstance. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration simultaneously. Currently, if we're going to talk about the benefits of downsizing in today's market, when we look at inflation, which we all feel on a daily basis, whether you're going to buy milk at the grocery store, eggs, filling your gas tank, it's pretty hard to deny that it's here, right? So everything, all the costs of everything's going up. The cost of basic daily living is going up pretty significantly. So when we think about things like electric bills, property taxes, lawn care, construction, keeping your house in proper working order. We're not even talking about updating your home or renovating a kitchen. We're just talking about the basics of upkeep. Those costs are also obviously going up. And when you hire companies, care companies, construction companies, anything like that, they are going to pass those costs down to their customers because, they're not going to eat those costs themselves, obviously. So inflation is definitely a factor. Again, thinking about where am I in this state of life? Does this serve me? Not only emotionally, but financially also. Oftentimes, sometimes people have been living in their homes for a very, very long time. 30 years, they've raised their children there, they've raised their families there. And that's where the emotional piece comes in. But as a result, there's also usually a lot of equity in a home as well, which is something to definitely look into. And again, back to the inflation piece, if there is equity in this home and you sell your home and you're able to kind of take some of that cash, if you will, you can invest it in ways that will serve you in the future better, that will help plan ahead for what your life's going to look like from here on out. Again, whether that's wanting to travel, whether that's wanting to move closer to family, whether that's wanting to invest in the stock market, whatever it may be that pertains to your situation, it oftentimes does result in having that liquidity. The other interesting factor that I all know COVID kind of changed the world in so many ways. It also changed how people work. So people that are not retired yet, that are still active in the workforce, are often working virtually a lot more often than they once did, which means people are spending more time in their house, right? Which means people are wanting single family homes, bigger homes, whatever the case is. But that's definitely a trend that has been noticed as well. And currently, inventory is pretty low. So I would still label this as a seller's market. I think it's also important to look at the market and time things properly, right? You can always put your house on the market, but the key to it is to know when to put your house on the market, not only from a lifestyle perspective, but also from a financial perspective. Oftentimes somebody's home is their largest investment they've ever made in their lives. And so, you know, it's important that you get, not to use a cliche term, but the most bang for your buck. So that's kind of what it is, you know, from a market sales perspective. Again, things to consider. Do you need an estate attorney, right? Those are other professionals that may need to be brought into the situation. So again, there's a lot of factors that come into it. And it is hard. It is definitely a hard decision. But in our experience, we found that there's also a sense of relief, right? When decision is finally made and people come to terms with the fact like, okay, this is the best decision for me currently right now. Once all is said and done, I think oftentimes people find a freedom in that too.
Even just with simple things we've heard is, oh my gosh, I don't have to walk up the steps anymore. That one's huge. Sometimes that's just so overlooked, just going from a 2-story to a 1-story. Downsizing doesn't necessarily mean you have to live in your own home. So, you know, there are options with that. So,
Absolutely.
wants to do the.
I was gonna say, yeah, if you want to move on into part 2, which is like, what are your options?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So yeah, as I was about to say, so you can move to a smaller home. It could still be a single family. It could be a condo. It could be a place that has amenities and is geared towards somebody that's maybe over 55. But it doesn't have to be. There's so many different things out there. Some people might choose to stay in their home and maybe they want to have someone come in and help them. And that's an option too. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to. There are options. Of course, some people like to move in with family. They might, whether it's their kids and having everyone under one roof. So we've seen a lot of people purchasing places that have, you know, a side entrance so that their parents can have their own entrance and still feel like they live by themselves, but they're also together and they, you know, just get to each other very quickly. And then, of course, there's retirement communities, which have, you know, they range from very basic to, you know, an active lifestyle all the way up to somebody that might need more help. So there's so much out there. It's not just, oh, I'm downsizing. Okay, now I'm going to live in this place.
There's definitely a way to creatively downsize, if you want to call it that, right? I also know of a couple situations. One in particular is coming to mind, but 2 women both, you know, lost their spouses, and they were retirement age. They opted to move in together, friends, and it was really, it was a great living arrangement for them. It worked out really, really well. So they split the costs. They enjoyed each other's company, and it was just, again, it's a creative solution to downsizing. But yeah, sometimes it does, you know, it works out. There's so many ways to think about this that, you know, aren't necessarily obvious. I think immediately everyone's mind goes to, oh, I don't want to, you know, have to move to retirement community, or, you know, I don't want to have to move to a small apartment or condo, whatever it is. There are definitely many.
So one thing I was thinking of, so what you're saying is even in the retirement communities, there's a lot of variation. I don't know if you could.
Oh, yeah. There, you know, there's all the way from people that live completely independent, people that need a little bit of help, people that need more help, people that are, you know, not able to really do much for themselves. And these can range from houses to condos to, you know, all different types of living situations. So it doesn't, again, move into town, still have a single family house if that is what you are
And some
interested
people
in.
just like those communities for the social element,
Mhm.
right? There's, like, my parents have retired. And I think that they felt excited to retire, but now that they've been living in this retired lifestyle, they're all kind of bored, right? So a lot of these communities have some really helpful social pieces to it that people really, really enjoy.
Right. So in summary, it's, if you downsize, it could be a smaller place, just as anybody would buy, a smaller home or a condo. or maybe less land, could be living with a relative, like in an in-law suite situation or just in their home, or in a retirement community that there's a whole host of different styles of them and continuing care aspects, or just like an over 55 type community that may not offer the continuing care, but you're might have like an HOA or something like that to handle the lawn maintenance. And
Snow removal, lawn maintenance, gardening, all the things that you might not want to physically do yourself. So.
Great. All right, so should we segue into how to actually start these discussions?
Yes.
Or did you have anything else? Okay, great. So trying to put myself back on, I have it on Spotlight, so I'm wondering if it will just go ahead and do that when I'm. All right, so when we talk about having these kinds of discussions, this seems to be the most challenging part for things. I wonder why it's not making me like the main person. It's kind of weird. I'm just going to do that just because it'll record better. All right. Well, maybe it will eventually when it senses that I'm the one that's talking. So we kind of have two scenarios here that I was thinking about with this. One was when you start to talk you're ready to, but your spouse is not ready to, and having to have that discussion. The other is just doing it that way. Okay. So talking to your spouse about it. The other discussion I was envisioning was an adult child talking to their parent about it. Because those are really, the two scenarios you're going to have. And although they're very different relationships, a lot of the techniques that I'm going to talk about are the same, are applicable to either. So just to start off, it's really important to have very realistic expectations about how long this decision might take to make. This isn't a one discussion. This isn't something people usually decide in one day. This is going to possibly might be many discussions over a period of time, and that period of time might be months to even years. And that's okay. It is such a huge decision emotionally, physically, and financially that, if it's a couple, we want to make sure the couple are both on board and feel good about the decision, else it's going to cause a ton of strife. And if it's simply you're talking to your parent about it, it really is ultimately their life. And so that leads me to, if you are in the category of you're watching this because you want to talk to your aging parent about it, that really attaining some distance, because at the end of the day, it really is, you might be the one tasked with doing all the estate management, once they're gone, but it really is their life. Whereas if you're talking to your spouse, it's your life too. And so you really have to come to some level of compromise. The other caveat here is whatever your relationship dynamics you had before aren't going to just like change with this conversation. So if you've acquiesced to your spouse on all major decisions for the last 30 years, you can't expect it to be a whole lot different from their perspective on this one. And so then that's going to be a lot of work to change that dynamic. If you and your spouse have a long history of being able to make really big decisions together in a really productive way, then this is probably going to go a lot easier. And for a parent talking to their child, like even if you're 50 years old, your parent still sees you as like a 5-year-old. And so that can be kind of hard to understand. But you do need to take that in. That's just sort of how we're wired. So understanding that. But both should start conversations, I believe, and there's probably a ton of different theories about this or thoughts on this, but both should start with open-ended, just a very open-ended, broad question. Okay, have you ever thought about downsizing? That's simple. Because the answer to that is going to give you a wealth of information of where they're at with that. Maybe they've put a ton of thought into it and they have really good rationale for what they're going to do and they have a plan, and maybe they've put like no thought into it. But starting there, if it's your spouse, you could even, add something along the lines of, I've been thinking a lot about our future, and I've been thinking about downsizing. I'm just curious what your thoughts are if you've been thinking about this. And then we want to use the speaker. Oh, hold on, I hear someone, but I can't see because I did it. Okay. Were there any comments? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody and I couldn't see any of you. Okay, I'll just keep talking then. Then we're going to use what's called the listener speaker technique. And we actually have a little resource list that Curry made that we'll send out. And there's a beautiful script put out, I think, by Northwestern University on this. That's just like really easy to follow in terms of the technique. They use a different example. But speaker, oftentimes when we're talking to someone, we're formulating our response while they're talking, right? So this is different. We really want to be 100% focused on listening to listen and understand. And so in the speaker listener technique, each person gets a chance to speak, but the other person, when one person is speaking, the other person's job is to, when they're done speaking, to reflect back what they heard, not to ask questions, not to ask for clarification. Well, they will ask for clarification to make sure that they've heard it right, but not to challenge the points, not to do a rebuttal. And so, and then once that person's done speaking, they've reflected back, the listener has reflected back, they've asked, did I get it right? The speaker will say yes. Then the listener becomes the speaker, and the listener has to reflect back. So each person gets a chance at this. So what that might look like if you're talking to your spouse, you've asked the question, have you ever thought of downsizing? And then your spouse says, I'm never leaving this house. I'm worried about the market. Our mortgage is paid off. I know that financially we're safe here. The market's been crazy. There's no way I would do that. And this is just where we've always lived, and I feel really good here. And so the listener would reflect back, no matter what they're thinking, they would reflect back. Okay, so it sounds like you're really comfortable here, and that you also have a lot of financial concerns if we were to move. So you're getting a really good sense of where they're at. Now let's say, I'm going to do a different scenario. Let's say you're talking to your parent about this, and your parent has effectively said that they want to stay in place, and it's your turn. You might say something along the lines of, okay, well, I'm just really, really concerned that you're going to fall on the steps. And I'm also really concerned that you're getting more and more isolated here, especially if you're not able to drive at a certain point. And I'm also, to be honest, really concerned that, my life is super busy. I've got the kids, I've got my job, I have to travel a lot for my job. I don't know that I'll be able to help you in the way you might need. Like, I don't know if I'll be able to grocery shop for you or help you keep the house clean. And so then the parent would reflect back those concerns. Okay, so you're getting a really good sense of where the person's at, and you're giving them a non-judgmental space to talk about their concerns. Then you want to do what Chip and Dan Heath, they wrote a wonderful book called Decisive. And I forgot to send it for the resource list, but we can email the link for that out. They term this way of making decisions called WRAP. Widen your options, reality test your assumptions, attain distance, and prepare to be wrong. And so they have this acronym WRAP, and to do this around any big decision. And so, in the case of, say, the adult child who's concerned, have all these concerns about their parent, he might respond with, well, I don't really particularly like being social. All that socializing was really your mother, and she's not here anymore. I get all my social needs met by Zooming with my sister once a week and doing the poker game once a week. And if I can't drive to that, I could always take an Uber. So he's both widen the options of how his needs could be met, and he's reality tested her assumptions. She assumes he was lonely, but he's not somebody that really wants or desires a lot of social contact. You know, for the example of, say, a lot of times people don't want to go to, you know, a nursing home. They kind of picture this really depressing place with people with walkers and mushy food. Most any of these places will let you come visit. And many will also let you spend the night to get a real sense of what it's like. And so that's a way of reality testing assumptions, of preparing to be wrong. A lot of them have, you know, really great vibrant community going on, and widening your options, right? Because as we heard from Curry and Sophie, you don't have to go from your family home to a continuing care situation. You can go to a smaller single home. You can go to a condo. You know, this is a wonderful time in life. I can't speak to the financial implications of this, obviously. But if you're somebody who, say, always wanted to live on the West Coast and you never got that opportunity, maybe this is a great chance to, you know, downsize everything and do like a little sort of like a gap year, right? Sublet a place out in California for a year and then make a decision after that about where you're going to be more permanently. So and a lot of retirees are now getting RVs and just traveling around the country that way. It's become really popular since the pandemic. So there's a lot of different options, including living with family and cohabitating with a friend. What I will always say about that is have a lot of discussions if you're going to do that, whether live with family or live with a friend, about boundaries, both physical boundaries, how often you can interact, financial boundaries, and really have honest discussions about it. Because if you just jump in, it could be absolutely disastrous, and even potentially test driving it a little bit before you do it. And so, right. And I think also, if you're talking to kind of going back to the scenario of the spouse, and I'm sorry if I'm a little bit confusing here, you know, it might take a lot of take and give to get where you both want to be. But I think it's really important that, you know, people do get to live out their final years in a place that is serving them, that is good for them, that is good for both people. And there are ways of finding that compromise. And I think that if you're talking to a parent, really sort of attaining that distance, that if they really are resistant, then getting very clear about your boundaries and what you're willing to do, both time, energy, and financially for them, and then getting comfortable with setting those boundaries. But I think that, you know, going back to how we entitled this, Downsizing with Compassion, approaching the whole thing with a lot of compassion and care for each other's feelings goes a long way, because these conversations come from an intention of wanting a person to be safe and to be cared for and to be in the best living situation possible. So, yeah, that is what I have to say about that. And we now have time for questions or comments.
I have one, and thank you very much for those tips, because getting back to what you're saying about conversations that you've already had with your partner, or in my case, a parent, we've been talking about this sort of downsizing situation for literally years. It kind of, we're always considering other options. Should we move in together? Should we buy a house together? You know, and along those lines, we were talking about how it's a seller's market. And so I'm just kind of curious what the market looks like for people who might want to have sort of a duplex situation, or like you said, an in-law suite. I would imagine in this day and age, those are probably pretty well sought after, right? People are looking for those types of, yeah.
And out here, I don't know where you're located.
I know where. Yep, Kearney.
Okay, so there's a lot of the ones that we do see. Either they have done the work themselves, and I was actually talking to Sophie recently. I saw it's in Maryland, right? This community popped up and I thought it was great. And I think that this is going to be a thing, but it was a whole community of what looked like regular single family homes. But when you walk up on the porch, there's a door to the left and there's a door straight. So there's a whole separate living area for, that's smaller. And then there's the main house, but there was a kitchen and it was, a full house. And I thought that was so cool. And I just can't imagine that wouldn't be something that we start to see,
Right.
Here.
And it's funny.
Yeah, it's also,
I was just
sorry
along
to
those
interrupt.
lines. I've actually had that a similar conversation with friends of mine who I don't have children, and a few of my friends that don't have children. We've actually talked about that trend of maybe retiring together, like having this little commune so we can take care of each other.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
thinking pretty creatively, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I think it's an amazing solution. I was going to say also, oftentimes, I think of the layouts of ranchers, right? Where they end up being these long homes where it's all one level. But sometimes creating two living spaces is actually pretty simple, right? So some homes, although they're built as single family, currently, their homes are pretty conducive to creating separate living space.
Got it. Okay.
So that's another thing. Like, you don't always have to go out there just looking for something that's already designated as, here's two living spaces, etc. A lot of homes, that can be created and relatively easily, honestly.
Okay, that makes sense.
I always think of the Golden Girls.
Yeah.
It's the best. Right?
Yeah.
This trend. They did. They did. There's something to it.
Any other questions? Comments?
One thing I did want to mention in our resources, we have a video that the AARP put out, but really I think anybody at any age could benefit from watching it with decluttering. And they talk a lot about just the benefits in both a reduction of anxiety and an improvement in attention and concentration if your environment is not cluttered. And they mentioned that a lot. So I think it's a really great thing, even if you're not ready to downsize yet, to start the process of decluttering so it's not really overwhelming once you are ready to go, because it'll just give you benefits in the real here and now. And in that video they give a lot of good tips if you're not very creative about how to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. When we talk to our clients that are downsizing, anybody really that's looking to sell their home, we come in and look at a property. One of the topics we discuss is how to make this property more appealing to a potential buyer. And so that's definitely a big piece of that too. We're going to come in and we're going to take pictures of your home so we can create a beautiful listing, so we can attract buyers, and people are going to come in and they're going to look around, right? So again, decluttering is a huge piece of that. Not only decluttering, but in some cases, we may even suggest neutralizing some of the decor. If we sell paper up from like 1970, we may suggest, hey, let's consider painting the walls like a nice neutral color. So those are the things that we will also definitely come in and suggest from a living perspective.
I was going to ask, were these resources like the AARP decluttering video is? Did you say that you did? I apologize. You already send that?
No. We will send it afterwards, so you didn't miss anything.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
I find my mom is doing that. She's constantly working on projects around the house, but they never get done. And then she gets frustrated, and then it just it's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah. And sometimes it's worth
Yeah.
bringing in a professional organizer. I mean, they're definitely
Yeah, I suggested that too.
um,
Yeah.
alleviate some burden too.
And maybe she might listen more than you, perhaps.
Oh, absolutely. I guarantee it. If someone else says it, she'll do it. If it comes from me, it's not happening.
Let's be realistic about your dynamics. That's good. Yeah, and I was going to say too, part of what's really good about kind of approaching this with compassion and using the seeker listener technique is that you can then help problem solve. And so if it's something, you know, that the person is actually probably open to moving, but they're too overwhelmed by the process, then breaking it down like that. Okay, well, I'll come in and I'll help you pack up, or we'll declutter first and coming up with a systematic way of doing it. Or if they really do want to just go, I'll come in and I'll help you pack a box a week. That's all we're going to do. It's a box a week, and breaking it down. Or the financial piece, because it's interesting. I think a lot of people feel like if your house is paid off, why would you take on some other kind of new, like it seems risky, right? To sell your house and pay it off. But it is interesting to hear that financially it might actually be a lot better for you because you've had so much equity in that house that you can then use that money to, like you guys were saying, invest for the future and buy something smaller and cheaper. And especially if you have, you know, you're no longer working, so you don't need to live near the workplace. It opens up a lot of flexibility to move to areas that might be cheaper. Or if you are still working, the telecommuting that everybody's doing now opens that up. So yeah, so really helping the problem solve from that perspective.
And the other piece, this is just kind of a detail, but you know, I've also heard when it comes to like sentiment, again, living in a home for a long time, I think a lot of students become very, very attached to them, understandably so. And they worry that, oh, the next person's going to, you know, rip the front porch off, and I love that. Or, you know, the next person's going to come here and knock the house down. So technically speaking, again, from a legal perspective, when we do write up a contract, if those details do come into play, that can actually be written into the agreement. Like, by, you know, written into this agreement, your agreement, you're not going to tear the front porch of this house off ever. So that is stuff that can get actually, so that is stuff that can actually get, you know, written into these agreements too, because sometimes people do worry about, again, the preservation of the property or maintaining, you know, a certain facade or whatever it is, because people do, they get very, very attached to their homes, and that's understandable.
Oh, that's really interesting. I had no idea you could do that. Yeah, that's really cool. And I would say from an emotional perspective, you know, it might sound a little bit hokey or whatever, but you can thank your home. You know, like it's a grieving process oftentimes to have to grieving that, depending on how you feel about moving from that state of life. Like some people move very gracefully from one stage of life to the next, and they just embrace the next and they're okay. But a lot of people can't do that. And so just, you know, kind of thanking your home. Thank you for having this place I could raise my family. Thank you for having this place I could feel secure. And yeah, putting it out there that it keeps doing that. Any other thoughts, questions? Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will have, or did you have any last words, Carrie and Sophie?
No, just we appreciate you joining us. And if you have questions that come up later on, you know, our contact information will be in the information sent out. Feel free to reach out, email, phone, text, whatever. We're happy to chat.
Thank you.
Great. All right. And we will follow up with that info sheet of the resources.
Great. Okay. Everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.